Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. Peter and I are very excited today as we have Dr. Chris Salierno on. We've been wanting to connect with you for quite some time, so good to have you here, buddy.
Thanks, man. I'm really excited to be here, and same thing. I've been looking forward to talking to you at some point. So no time like the present.
Exactly. So big news. I mean, what do we got? Like 60 days into this, essentially. You are now Chief Dental Officer of Tend. That's pretty cool. Did I get that title correct? CDO, Chief Dental Officer?
CDO. So the business has been around for almost 2 years, and this position was just created as they're a late stage startup, and so they're growing rapidly and need to create new infrastructure as they get along. And I'm very lucky, very fortunate that they thought of me when it was time to create this position.
Great. That involved you doing having to let go of a lot of obligations, as we were kind of talking before.
Yeah.
Sell your practice, relinquish dental economics.
Yep. Selling my practice to my business partner, which is great. She's wonderful. Her and I started the practice 12 years ago. So it's in a great position, even, post COVID, it's doing really well. It's out on Melville, Long Island. And so Dr. Aaron Thomas, my partner's taken that over. And then transitioned out of my role as chief editor of dental economics. I was doing that for about 7 years, and Pam Maraglino Muniz is taking over that position. So it's like bittersweet. It's hard to not do. I still see patients, but not at the extent I was, of course, a few months ago.
I always was in admiration, Chris, of watching. I was like, how does he an editor of a magazine and has a practice? I was always thinking back then, like, I'll
let you in on a secret. So you really can't be chief editor of dental economics and have a full-time practice. There would be no way to do that, to be practicing 5-6 days a week and doing that. So Dr. Pam has a consolidated schedule. I had one, and I had a business partner, which really helped, right? Like the days I wasn't in the office, she was seeing patients. So that's part of it. Now, if someone like Josh Austin, our buddy here, who is practicing so much, he's practicing 5, maybe even 6 days a week, I'm not even sure. And he's got a regular column that he does in dental economics, plus his busy lecturing schedule that. I marvel at how he does that, juggles all of that. My secret was just not being full-time chairside for all those years.
I think it's important because everybody's looking at each other and we're always comparing our lives. And we have to take into consideration that many people practice, but all practice is not created equal. I know many dental educators that have doctors that are aspiring to be like them. I'm like, you actually really don't want to probably be like them. They're dental educators. They actually see 2 patients a week, or they generate $200,000 of production in their clinical schedule. They actually make their money doing this or that. So I think we compare ourselves unfairly, and there's a lot of shame in that. I can't do all that.
I'm glad you called that out. I totally agree. That's just something that's not taught enough in dental school. And I know there's add that to the list of things that aren't taught in dental school, but
exactly.
It's just there's different business models, right? You can go work in private practice, be a total stud clinician, posting all these great cases online nowadays, and looking like you're just living your best life. But maybe your business actually isn't even that busy, right? It's a high-end, gorgeous practice, and you're doing beautiful dentistry, but maybe from a business standpoint, you're faking it more than you're making it online,
right?
And that's not a bad thing, right? Maybe that dentist is
maybe you're getting $9,000 a crown, so you're only doing one of those a day, but it's not real. It's not replicable for the average guy or average gal.
Correct. If you couldn't have every dentist in the United States practicing that way, it wouldn't work. Yeah. So I think that's important. And you can't, it's hard to even put them into buckets. There's just so many ways that a dentist can earn a living these days, especially as a business owner. But even not as a business owner, there's so many pathways to having a successful career. And that's a beautiful thing, that there's not just the one way, right? Like when our parents' generation and the generation before them were in dentistry, there were only a couple of ways to do it, right? And now there's so many, and I see that as a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, even like Craig and myself, you're right. We, obviously, Chris, we have summits and masterminds and stuff, so we've kind of gotten into that side. But it's just interesting how you say there's no one path that works, because I think dentistry is fascinating because you get to kind of carve your own. You can be just kind of you can coast, so to speak, or you can have a pretty good lifestyle with the 4 days a week. And once you get your license, like you don't have to have a stressful situation, or you can have these no limits career where you can go very entrepreneurial, or you can get an academia. I mean, there's just so many routes. And like you said, unfortunately, some of our colleagues, we hear podcasts or we see videos or we see lectures. We're like, I want that. And like Craig is saying, like, yeah, do you really want that? Right.
Well, it's just recognizing what business that person's in. Like there's a dental educator that I'm friendly with, and he's out in California. He's a great guy. He does wonderful things for dentistry, but he makes his money teaching dentists. So if you're a dentist that's admiring what he's doing and want to replicate that for your clinical practice, it's a non-viable business plan.
Right.
So you can learn, but if you want to have his schedule and his clinical load, he probably grosses $250 or $300 a year, which is fine, but it's not going to, what's paying for his life is his educational seminar. I think that's important. And I would love it if more people would disclose that. Like, hey guys, I make my money this way or that way. And I don't actually do it through clinical practice. So before you try to, do the clinical practice of what I'm doing, it won't meet your needs. I think that'd be refreshing to hear that.
It would be very refreshing, and I doubt we'll see it anytime soon.
Exactly.
I think it's a great idea.
we had
too transparent for them.
We had another guy on the podcast, great guy, great educator. And he's like, look, my hygienist is, got injured or on maternity leave or something like that. So for the last 6 months, I've just been doing hygiene all day. I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's fine. But it's like, that's not going to generate the life that he shows on his Instagram. He's actually making that money from dentists. So I think it's just important.
So I learned about the different business models when I first got out of dental school. The first gig I had was.
When did you get out, Chris? I think I read 2005. I thought
I graduated 05. So from my GPR 06. So 2006, I start working in private practice, and I worked for these two gentlemen, lovely folks. They taught me a lot. They were two different practices. In two different parts of town, and they had it was very interesting. It was like, this is like pre-DSO. They were trying to merge together under the same brand, and they were trying to get other dentists to do this too. The idea being you cross-train staff and share them and share marketing dollars and all that kind of stuff. It was an interesting idea ahead of its time, and it never really got off the ground. But so I worked in these two different practices that were very, very different practices. They just happened to have the same brand, and that was it. That's where the big similarities began and ended. Right? They didn't have the same practice management software or adoption of technology.
Oh, wow.
Blah 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 blah. So, one of the dentists is what made me think of it. One of the dentists had a hygienist part-time, wasn't super busy. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that business wasn't doing so great. But the other dentist didn't have a hygienist, was more old school, and was doing all the hygiene himself. And so they would come together once a month, and I was invited as their associate that they shared. And we'd have dinner, and they'd usually just like complain about things, like not really move the business forward. Like this was just like their
venting session.
Yeah, their venting session, exactly. So, and the one dentist that didn't have a hygienist, be like, oh, so busy today. I was so busy. Oh, I just couldn't get room to breathe.
Yeah.
And sure enough,
can't even take a pee break. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. He did have a busy schedule, but he also, here's the thing. He took 5 visits to do a crown. He did prep temp, brought back for impression. Then he had his coping try-in because he was still doing PFMs. This is back in the day, right? Then he did a bisque bake try-in, and then he did an insert. So 5 visits for every single crown. So that'll add some time to your schedule, won't it? Right?
Oh my God. Or some attrition of patient base to your schedule.
Oh my,
no, his boss never minded.
My
patients love coming in for 5 visits. They love it.
They just love it.
Well, they really do, because we talk about things, and my patients never.
Very old timey kind of practice, and so he also and he didn't have a hygienist, so half his day was doing hygiene. And he would complain about it, like, oh, this is crazy, wasting my time. I'm like, hire a hygienist. What are you doing? But in his mind, he was so busy.
What do you think? I think there's still some of that lingering in our industry today. So
we talk about that all the time.
Where do you think that comes from, Chris? Like something like that?
That mentality?
The need to be busy, the need that I don't want to spend money because they're quote unquote an expense and a lost leader. Like, what's the mentality on that? You think that from that hygiene example?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental business understanding that is lacking in our profession. So busyness does not equal productivity. We would, of course, all agree with that, right?
Amen.
So you can have a day of running around like an idiot doing denture adjustments, and then when you look at your P&L, your end of the day sheets or whatever, you're gonna be like, what? $0? Like, what the heck happened, right? So busyness does not equal productivity. That's one thing. And then the next layer on top of that is productivity does not equal profitability. Right. So these are three related but separate concepts. And you absolutely can have a business model where you practice, 4 days a week from whatever hour to whatever hour. And you're seeing, like LVI protocol, you're seeing like 3 patients a day, and it's high productivity. You're charging, you're able to command a nice fee for service case. Like, I know that's like kind of the dream that we all think we want. And you're doing, maybe even more complex prosthodontic cases, perhaps, right? That sounds great. A lot of dentists would sign up for that. That is not necessarily busy, but it's certainly productive. And if they're running their schedule the right way, it can also be highly profitable. But they're 3 distinct concepts. And I think whatever business model a dentist is going to entertain, they should think about those 3 things and how they are related, but not equal.
So I have a little bit of a contrarian opinion on that. I think that dentists don't actually care as much about business. They should, they don't. What trumps everything is ego. So I've just seen in 22 years and having dozens of associates, I realized that people have 2 distinct needs: to be profitable and make money, and completely different need to be busy. Because what it's like. We all started out on our first day and the phone rang and we pick it up and it was our mom. And it was like, oh shit, I thought it was a patient. Like, we were all disappointed of that. And the pain of sitting around for patients is so great. It's an ego bruise. So I've had doctors that I've known about that are, 3-4 days a week producing, collecting $1 million a year and saying, well, I got a lot of free time on my schedule. Imagine if I just went on like 4 or 5 or 6 different insurances and I could be booked up 3 weeks in advance. So, and then they wind up doing that and they wind up making less money, but they're kind of happy that they're busy. So I think it's an independent need to be busy, feels needed and wanted.
That's very interesting. I don't disagree with that at all. I would say then, so another side, and I know we're speaking very broadly, but another side of that is the dentists who are on, say, a handful of plans, and they're too busy. They're having capacity issues. They now have to figure out, how do I add more time to a schedule, hire an associate, maybe drop some plans. They're actually getting burned out. They're not bored, they're burned. And they're trying to then figure out how to get a little less busy and get back some peace of mind, work-life balance, and increase their profitability, or at least not lose profitability at the same time, right?
But it's kind of like a runaway train, that insurance thing. And Peter and I talk about this all the time. If you're in a couple of PPOs and you start to get really, really busy, you're booked up, 3, 4, 6 weeks to get a new patient in. An average fee-for-service patient will not wait 6 weeks.
Yes.
So what do you get? You get more insurance patients, and you actually, it's like weeds in the garden. The weeds overtake the vegetables. So the PPO practice will just like be a runaway train. You won't be able to catch it because the fee for service patients will just dwindle. I mean, all of us can afford a cleaning, and we don't want to wait 6 weeks to get in on those places.
Yeah. So in my practice, so there's 12 years, and I think it was total scratch practice on Long Island. There's plenty of dentists there. It's a suburban environment, but I'd call it like urban suburban. And I think that's important to mention, that we're not in like a rural area. So there are plenty of dentists in our neighborhood, and it took a few years to get really up and running. By like starting around 6, like we were getting busy, right? And the money was coming along with it. But as we started to hit capacity issues, and as my partner are just like, oh my gosh, our schedule is already overbooked for the day, plus now these new emergencies that are coming in, like this is insane. The paycheck was nice, but we were, starting to get burned out pretty quickly. So we entertained the idea and eventually pulled the trigger on dropping one of our plans. And it was fantastic. It was the best because of exactly the reason you just mentioned. We saw we were booking out patients that wouldn't want to wait for us, right? They were booking them out because we didn't have room for them, and the weeds were not creating that room for the nice hearty pumpkins. Let's go with that metaphor. So, the problem is, I think it's hard for dentists to realize that, for them to have that perspective, right? It takes constant conversations with their front desk team to say, oh yeah, by the way, we're getting calls for new patients, and I told them it's a month and they said they'd call back, and no, they haven't called back yet, right? Like it takes there's no easy report from most practice management software that'll tell you that you're losing new patients. There are ways to now start capturing this stuff, but not a lot of dentists are using it. And that's the kind of thing we have to look out for, so that we know when it's to give dentists that confidence to start making more room in their schedule.
I love that you did that. Like, so, because, you know, you hear this, and I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of trepidation with saying, like, I don't really want to do that because I don't know which lever to pull. That's, you know, which one is it, kind of thing. So what was that inflection point for you where you're like, you know what, like, obviously being too booked out, but kind of walk through, you know, the fears that you had? Because we get to, I mean, I think this is a very, very good topic, and we approach it a lot. Craig and I get it. A lot of people. I mean, my practice has been totally fee for service from the start, but it's something that
well, some of your practices are PPO.
Well, one practice is, yes, you're right, and kind of phasing that out, but almost like you don't know which one sometimes. And so, did you kind of titrate all the way into fee for service, Chris?
Yeah, no, we still participate with a few of the quote big, good, quote unquote PPOs, but we whittled down one of the big ones. So first, I would do an analysis. We did analysis, and it said that like 7% of our active patient population was on this PPO. And we decided that was within our tolerance. You know, if it was 50%, we'd have to like take a minute and evaluate. But 7%, we're like, yeah, could we use 7% more time in our schedule? Was kind of the way we looked at it.
I love that.
Sounds about right. You know,
if everyone left, so to speak, from this plan, could we tolerate this decrease in patient flow? And the answer was yes. So like, let's do it. You know,
that's exactly right.
I love it.
We did lose a bunch, and that's okay. We wish them well. They can go find another dentist who participates with that plan, and that's great. It's all good. We did have some.
I got to a similar answer, but with the fee reduction. So we looked at, we looked at a certain PPO at a certain time. We had 1,000 patients on it for a practice like ours that represented, a low double-digit percentage, but we saw the fee decrease from UCR. So let's just say, for example, it was 50% decrease. So we said, if we lose 50% of these people, we'll still break even.
That's good. Yeah.
So, and we wound up keeping 50% or greater of that PPO. One of the things I like to tell patients is that even if you're not considering jumping off of a PPO, at least create time blocks in your schedule where you create
patients or dentists.
Room. I'm sorry.
You said one thing I like to tell patients about jumping off.
Thank you. One thing I like to tell dentists is that if you're not thinking of jumping off the PPO, you should at least create a fee for service new patient block. Allow the space in your schedule, 2 or 3 or whatever it is, but just hold that as the holy grail until maybe 48 hours or 72, and then fill it up. But at least create that space for that fee for service patient to show up.
Because if you're booked out far in advance,
right? If you're booked out far in advance, correct. So maybe you don't really know. Maybe it's seasonal. Maybe you just acquired a practice. You're thinking about bringing on an associate. It doesn't really matter the mechanism, but at least put a block in there, and you'll see what starts happening to your fee for service patient numbers.
Yeah,
because I just don't think they'll wait.
Yeah, agreed. So I look at it as dentist capacity and hygienist capacity. So if your hygienists are fully booked or darn near fully booked, for say, this tolerance goes towards how long do you think a new patient would wait for an exam?
Oh, right? And what's your answer to that? What do you think a new patient, fee for service patient, wants to get in for a cleaning? What do you think they'll wait? You
should not be. I think it's good to be about 90% ish booked, say a couple of months out. If you are like 90% ish, right? So if you're 100% booked 2 months out, forget it.
Okay, so let me just ask you a different way. How long do you think a new patient will wait to get established? A fee for service new patient will wait.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm curious because I have a number in my head. Pete does too. I'm sure they're all 3 different numbers.
I think I will put an asterisk on my answer here. If you are Michael Appa, you get a longer wait time.
Agreed. So let's not talk. Yeah.
Okay. Now I know there's only there's him or Larry Rosenthal, but if you have created for yourself such demand because you're doing more niche dentistry, or you're the only dentist that does cosmetic dentistry for 50 miles or whatever.
Understood. Yeah.
You get a buffer here that's bigger than everyone else.
This doesn't apply to you.
But for 99.99998% of us.
Correct. But for the rest of us, I want to, my personal personal number, I want to get someone in within 2 weeks.
Yeah. What's your number, Peter? How long do you think? I mean,
Same.
obviously they'll wait, but what do you think the data point is?
2 weeks max. I agree.
Yeah. I say 10 days, 10 days to 2 weeks. Like, I'm going to find someone else just this time. I'll get back in to see Dr. Salerno.
It's that fine line though, Chris, of being, there's a scarcity thing, meaning a fee-for-service patient is accustomed to wanting the luxury, the top, wanting the scarcity. I can get that kind of thing.
Well, look at how we
not creating this. Oh, we can see you right now. Like, you don't want to be like, oh, we can see you tomorrow, right? So there's got to be some kind of Peter, scarcity created.
Look at the other industries. Like, you could fly to London tonight. You could probably figure out a way to fly to New York. You're going to pay through the nose, but you're on that airplane. Mm-hmm. The guy to the left paid $600 because he booked a year and a half ago. The guy to the right paid, $800, and you just paid $3,800 for the same flight. But the market allows you to dictate what you want. You're just going to pay more. But our practices are not allowing our patients to choose that. We're making the decision for them. Mm-hmm. We don't have a mechanism.
We don't have a dynamic pricing model, do we, Craig?
We do not.
That's a very, very interesting point. And I think it relates to, I hate to use the word entitlement because that doesn't sound great, but this perception from the patient that this is a healthcare service. And so that they are, even if it's just a cleaning, quote unquote, they feel that they need to be able to be seen for that service at the same fee that everyone else is. I think I think customers are accustomed to paying more for expedited or exemplary higher quality service, right? But I think when it comes to healthcare, routine healthcare, not going to see APA, but routine healthcare, I think they want to have the same price as everyone else. If anything, a lower price.
I respectfully disagree, but I mean, I think
they want that. Yeah, but I think I don't think you can. I agree with Chris. I don't think you can do that. I think it would become looking too opportunistic as a clinician. Meaning, right?
Then tell that to the MD VIP guys and all the other, and the Cleveland Clinic Executive Physical and all that. I mean, whilst I agree at a certain level, I just think there's a segment of the market, and it's more fee for service. It's a more fee for service segment. They are just accustomed, because society's training in this way, that if I should be able to get in, and I will go to the provider that will get me in. And I don't think it's a cost thing.
I think what you're talking about is like concierge dentistry, right? So there is a market, and it is definitely a fee for service market. There is a market for concierge dentistry, let's call it, where people will happily pay more. And understand that if they're going to get this extra level of service, that they're going to be paying for it. And if anything, they get to brag about it. Look at how much I paid for this service, if anything, right? I don't think that makes up the majority of patients, but I agree that there's a market for it. I agree with you.
But I want to belabor this point, but the fee for service patient is paying more already. Mm-hmm. So insurance, if we really want to distill it down to its basic, it is a discount. Because the minimums that are paid have not really evolved over the last couple of decades. It's just that you get a proprietary fee plan that's reduced. So by virtue, the fee for service patient is the premium paying patient, but it is what it is. I just think that we're not even, by booking ourselves 6 months and 8 months in advance and feeling great about our business models, we're actually cutting those patients out, regardless if they're VIP, premium, entitled, whatever. They can't even interact with us, even at their normal fees. We just say, we don't want your business, or we don't have room for your business.
Yeah. I'll agree. Just like that dentist I was referencing before, who got to vent and brag, humble brag, like, oh, I was so busy today. I think that is a mentality that many dentists have, is they get to brag about how busy they are, when really, again, I think who cares? I care about how profitable and productive you were. That is a more nuanced and interesting conversation, right? So,
but it's definitely not the common conversation. If we got around 100 dentists at random, we'd find more of those that you're talking about than the ones that are talking this way, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
Chris, as being the editor and I'm sure you've been involved in so many conversations from an apex situation in dentistry, like knowing what trends are coming, knowing, just the most innovative technologies, all the things, right? So you've had a transition from a practice owner to an editor and practice owner, and now you've transitioned into going into more of a consolidation standpoint, right? From a DSO, being the chief dental officer. Yeah. Right. So basically that's just clinical lead, right? I'm guessing.
Clinical lead. So it's an executive level position where I'm overseeing all of the different operations, especially as they're related to clinical dentistry.
So what would you say kind of is, let's call it the end of August 2021. What would you say kind of is the most pressing thing that you're seeing from a dental perspective? Meaning, we always talk about this, Chris. I always say self-awareness or situational awareness from the dentist is one of the most important things. You got to pick yourself up. You got to pick your head out of the sand, look around, see what's coming down the pike, even if you're not interested, whether it's technology, whether it's a DSO, whether it's new marketing techniques. You got to pick your head out of the sand. You can't just stay in your op for your entire career and expect these vulnerabilities not to attack you. And that's kind of the thesis of Bulletproof, right? It's learning all these things that we do so that we can kind of insulate ourselves from all these attacks, so to speak, if you will, metaphorically speaking, of course. So what is top of mind right now for you in our industry? And if you were talking to a group of dentists, you would say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. Therefore, kind of like, I want to tell you guys about this.
So I would say, I talk into my audiences about a whole host of different things that I think are of significant importance. But if I had to pick the one that I write about and lecture about the most, that I think helps sets the stage for all of the other things, is the concept of a target market. And the concept that dentists need to stop trying to be everything to everyone and try to be something very special to target demographics. We're taught in dental school to just go out and do dentistry, hang up a shingle. We're taught to, try to treat everyone and do as much dentistry as we can. And I think that makes us a little less special. As we are going to see an increase in the number of dentists, the ADA just updated their research in May, saying we're going to see more dentists working more dentist hours through 2040. So for the next 20 years, we're going to continue to have more dentists working. That's in part because of a slowed retirement, but it's also, as I'm sure you're aware, the increasing number of the inflow of dentists that are coming from more new dental schools
and more schools too.
I didn't know that. I didn't know there was more schools.
Yeah, so there's more schools by a net fact. Do you know, Chris, how many more schools net? Because I know some have closed.
Oh, I don't know. And that's always kind of floating around a little bit and they get delayed. I mean, it seems armchair like there's a new school at least every
yeah, at least around here. There's new ones.
Once a year, once every 2 years. So, and without even getting into student debt and all that stuff, just the inflow and delayed outflow. So we're going to, even with baby boomers retiring, even with, this is one of the things they looked at, that like half the dental student population roughly is female. And then people have said, well, maybe they are only going to work part-time because of a raised family. They looked at every possible way you could look at this, and the supply of dentists is going to increase for the next 20 years. So competition is going up. Now,
it's going to increase continually until 2040, Chris?
That is as far out as their projection goes. It's not that it's going to stop at that point for some reason. That's just as far as their models comfortably.
Okay. All right.
Now that number was 2032, I think it was 2032 a year or so ago when they did some of this earlier research. So they came back like a year later and said, oh, did we say 2032?
We meant 8 more years.
They went even longer. They're like, no, it's getting crazy.
Wow. Okay.
Now, arguably, the demand, so the supply is going up. The demand for our care is relatively flat, in my humble opinion. It's relatively flat. We saw an increase. This is all Marco Vujicic's research from the ADA Health Policy Institute. It's great material to read. He wrote a few years ago about this. The demand for our care, as referenced by, this is the metric he used, was just the amount of money Americans are spending on dental care services. So I'd say that's demand, right? Yeah. So they were increasing their spend year over year by 4%. By 4% from the 80s, the 90s, like year over year, Americans are like, veneers are a thing now, take my money. Implants are a thing now, take my money. In-office whitening, take my money, right? We're expanding our services and Americans are like, this is great, let's do this. Then around 2002, it started to change. That increase flattened out a little bit. It only increased by about 2% per year, right? Now, at this time, throughout this whole period, the supply of dentists is relatively flat. So yeah, the demand for our care in the early aughts started to change. Why? One can speculate. No one knows for sure. But around 2002, it started to change. It only increased by 2% per year. And what else increases like clockwork by 2% every year?
Money.
Yeah, inflation, cost of doing business. Exactly right. So our dentist earnings started to peter out a little bit, but we're still strong. And then, of course, since 2008, somewhat related to the Great Recession, the spend on dental care services has been relatively flat, relatively. What also happened in that year was the supply of dentists started to increase, in part because we had a bunch of people that were dentists about to retire. The Great Recession hit, and they're like, I'm going to keep this going for another couple of years. But we also started to see, perhaps coincidentally, a number of new dental schools begin to open up. So this is all a perfect storm for DSOs to come in, and we could go on and on about how those three factors: supply, demand, and average dentist earning have just those alone.
So supply has gone up, demand has stayed flat,
relatively flat. Where we've seen upticks in demand, this is important to look at. Where if you look at these curves now, like what is the demand, what is the amount of money being spent on dental care in the U.S., we've seen some helpful numbers. It certainly hasn't gone down. But where there's two groups that are spending more money on dentistry, it's kids, thanks in part to Medicaid increases. We've seen some more increases and better coverage in Medicaid in state levels. Now, that doesn't really help many of us. And the other group that's seen upticks in spend is wealthy seniors. Not all seniors, wealthy seniors, retired, no insurance plans, and they need more sophisticated dentistry. So if you're faced with that information that I've just given you, I think it's more important than ever before for us to distinguish ourselves and to think about target markets, whom we wish to serve, who we can take really good care of. Who do we like to see, right? If you like to see blue collar workers, then yeah, they take some, that's MetLife and it's Delta's couple plans in your local neighborhood, and they're just like low key patients, and they're like easy breezy. Yeah, doc, whatever you say, doc. If that's the kind of practice you want, you can go crush it with that, right? If, on the other hand, you want to have a more fee-for-service practice, great. You got to earn that. I know I'm sure you guys preach this all the time. You can't just say, well, I'm fee-for-service, poof, right? There needs to be a lot of thought that goes into building that fee-for-service business model. And then even then, what kind of, is it cosmetic fee-for-service? Is it just doing good bread and butter family dentistry fee-for-service? Like, there's different aspects. So, when I go through this exercise, and I have a whole exercise that I go through in my lectures, well, I use restaurants as a backdrop, right? There's a reason why you will happily go to your favorite steakhouse and drop $100 per person for that meal. And there's a reason why if you were to go to Outback Steakhouse, you would not even, you would never spend $100 per person at Outback Steakhouse, right? Like that Outback is a different experience. It's got a different target market. That high-end steakhouse and Outback are both selling steak, right? They're selling food that will sustain you, right, at its most basic level. But the experience, the quality of the service, so many of the marketing, all of these things change that high-end fancy steakhouse that you love going to celebrate special occasions, and when you just take the family to like Applebee's or Outback. So just that, the restaurant metaphor is how I start to teach dentists to understand, like, not all restaurants are the same, right? No, of course not. They are able to command different prices and have different marketing and different infrastructures to that add up to what their business model is. Well, the same goes for dental practices. We should not try to be everything to everyone. Think about how your practice can be something very special for target demographics.
I wonder if that number, that's really helpful. The amount that's being spent on dental care, you mentioned that Medicaid is added into that. I wonder what they're doing with the 750 million plus being spent on direct to consumer orthodontics, for example. I know SDC, I was just Googling it. SDC is like 750, I think, in revenue. And then there's a handful of others. I can't speak to their numbers, but is that being tracked in the expenditure? Is that coming out of the dental expenditure?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Because that's growing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think that there was a spend on in dental practices per se, but it quite possibly could have been. I have to look at that. That's an interesting call out.
But you know what I mean? Because that's likely, we're not getting involved in what they're doing, but that's likely to grow based on what we've all seen. When these companies came out, I remember having feelings like, I don't think that people will actually do that. Like, and that they are. The market's showing us that they are doing that. So I wonder how that affects dental spending, and if that takes away market share from dentists, long term. Mm-hmm. If patients are ultimately going to say like, I don't really need to do all that X-ray stuff and all that. I just would go down this local place.
Well, my comment to the direct to consumer stuff is, it's kind of like mall whitening. Actually, it's a lot like mall whitening. It's just
which I was also stunned that was a thing when that came out.
Oh yeah. And one's happening in the mail and one's happening in the mall. But the point is that non-dentists essentially are in the case of mall whitening, they're not even necessarily hygienists or it's a person that they're paying $10 an hour and they put a white lab coat on. So they're sitting they're in a mall kiosk and they're providing that service. The reason it works in part is because the consumer, and they're not patients, the consumer in this case thinks that they're getting the same service that they would get in your office. Oh, I sit in front of a light in a dental practice, or I sit in front of a light in a mall. One is a lot less. I'll just do that. Now, we know that it's not the same. Like there's actually a quality difference there, right? The amount of the prescription strength whitening agents are not being used in the mall. They're just using the stuff you can buy in a store, but they give the experience of having this high-end spa-like whitening that you would get in a dental practice. So I think there's a really valuable lesson there. How do we help teach our patients that even if you're getting a similar experience to what you think you would get here, it really isn't the same because of the quality of the materials that are used, or because they're just faking this experience. It's not actually real. I think that we can talk until we're blue in the face about, state practice acts, and we'll watch like our patients' eyes roll back in their head as we're no, you don't understand, you guys. Like, it's dentistry should be done by dentists. Okay. Forget it. They don't care.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point to make, is like we have more confidence and understanding of our abilities than the consumer does. So these things that come around, whether it's mall whitening or the myriad of different direct to consumer things, what I've learned is the consumer actually believes they're more protected than they are. People, especially in America, they actually believe that, that their state agencies and things that protect them, and they're probably not it's a little bit more caveat emptor, buyer beware on that. And if anything, it's made me realize the average patient, because I have highly intelligent friends that have used all the services we just described, inclusive of mall whitening. And it makes me realize, okay, I'm the only one who really cares about this stuff. The consumer just does not. They're like, how much does it cost? Is it convenient? And can I get in right away? And as dentists, we're not thinking that, well, I don't want to tell you what the cost is. I got to examine your whole case. And, oh, you're 42, you're 46. What's the difference? Like, why are we making it so confusing for patients to get the services they want? So that's what the other businesses are figuring out. Like, hey, dentist, you be a dentist. We'll make it more convenient for your patient, which I think is interesting.
Chris, I want to go back to your target market thing for a second, because I think it's fascinating. I think there's lots of levels that you can keep kind of unpacking that, and that'll help you define who you are. And I think so many practices don't know their target market, right? Because they've been told like it should be everybody. Get as many new patients as possible, right? And when you stand for nothing, or I guess you stand for nothing, you fall for anything kind of thing, right? So if they don't know who they're marketing to, they're just, I don't know, I'll just take them all. I'm busy. I've got geriatrics. I've got kids, I'm just taking it all. It's getting butts in the chair. Yeah. And I think that takes a different level of swagger to start defining like, all right, well, you know what? We really don't do that. And here's our people. But I think once you do define that, meaning the experience you just talked about from the restaurant, are you the Outback, or are you a Ruth Chris, or are you a finer steakhouse?
Yeah, that
helps you I think it helps your team know who you are, right? Your culture, I think, benefits from something like that. I think the second thing you get to benefit from is your marketing. It's a lot more inexpensive and a lot more effective, in my opinion, to market to exactly who you know who you are, right? Or who you're trying to attract.
Yeah.
But so many of us just don't know, well, I don't know who my target market is, right? It's not, because we get asked this from polls like, oh, what's your perfect patient like? I'm like, is it
vision? They don't have a vision.
It's a 45-year-old woman, right? Like, and they say, no, I can't, it's so confusing, right? Target market, I think, is so confusing in dentistry. So
it's fun. It's basic marketing education, but we just don't think of it. And it makes sense if you start to research it. There's great books like Business Model Generation by Osterwalder that I highly recommend. that help us go through that exercise. It starts with what your target demographic is. I urge dental practices to think about, say, 2-3 different types of their typical patients that they love to see. It's busy business people, it's soccer moms, it's these broad categories. We're not thinking about dentistry, we're thinking about personality types.
Right.
It's a fun exercise. It's one you can do with your teams too. Come up with what those are, and then the next step is, what's the unique selling proposition? So, and I won't go into the whole conversation here. Believe me, it's a full day course. But you say, all right, if you're trying to target busy business people as your target demographic, there's a lot of them in your area. It's who you like to treat. They tend to need cosmetic stuff, blah, blah, blah. Great. Well, what does that person want from their dental visit that you can provide that no one else is providing? And you start to think of what that is. It's flexible business hours, right? It's having a very nice reception area that isn't filled with children's toys, right? Like,
and time is their pain point, right? So stressing,
time is their pain point. You better be seeing them on time and getting them out early. You better have lunchtime appointments. You better have evening appointments, right? You start to put together what this looks like very quickly. I think it's fun to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
And as you come up with a few target demographics, you start to see, oh, well, it turns out we don't need to do this stuff over here, marketing efforts or what hours and days of the week you keep. Like, this is not for the 2 or 3 types of people we identified. This stuff is what we need to double down on. And so, how you create your practice, your office hours, your infrastructure, what materials and services you provide, all of these things you get a clearer picture on it.
But once you identify that
vision, too, it's like I always harp on this. People like, I want to practice like this, or I want to practice like that. Well, do you like doing these types of services? No, I really don't. I really like, like you said, the blue collar, like that could be a very fulfilling thing, like being in a blue collar area, because they're like, yes, doctor, anything you say. It's low headache, low stress. Everybody's super appreciative, but that shapes everything. What hours, what location, what does it look like? What does it stand for? What are your values? Everything is shaped on that. So when I hear like patient target demographic, I'm thinking vision, like, what do you want this to look like in 5 or 10 years? And that's something that people just don't get, because everybody hijacks other people's visions. And there's so many consultants out there, or dental consultants, that are like, this is what you got to do. This is exactly what you got to do.
And I'll challenge them on that. I agree with you. I think that if a consultant isn't doing that, if they're just saying your practice should look like this, they know the playbook on how to make your practice look like this. You're going to practice 3 days a week, and it's only going to be fee for service, and it's only going to be this. Right. Well, that may speak to you, but we also have to look into whether or not you actually want to live that lifestyle, what it really looks like, and is it even sustainable in your particular practice, right? If you're on, we know how geographically specific some of these opportunities can be. You can't have a fee for service high-end cosmetic practice on the quote unquote the wrong side of the tracks, whatever that means to you, right? Like, those are people that need to be treated too.
You can, but it'll be like growing corn in the desert. It'll be really freaking hard. You can do it.
Yeah,
like you
can have a high-end cosmetic practice on the quote unquote wrong side of the tracks. It just may not be fee for service, or maybe it can be. Maybe there's a way to make
you might have to
work.
do advanced marketing and staycation or destination dentistry. But the point is that we're trying to make, and I think it's very important. I'm glad we're covering it so in depth, is that know thyself. I always say that. I mean, it's the Stoic quote, know thyself. What do you want to do? Because everybody will take your money and tell you what you should do. You get the 3 opportunities, and then you work in this practice, and then 1 5 miles away, and then go to these 5 steps and 5 lectures. And it's just, we're really doing people a disservice, because it's the science of achievement, but the art of fulfillment. Scientifically, anybody can teach you how to make a cake, but maybe you don't even like cake. So you're following this recipe and you're like, I don't even like chocolate cake. I'm allergic to chocolate cake. But don't bake the whole cake, sit down and eat it to find out you hate it. Figure out what you want first. And that's where I think the patient demographic is that key. That's when you turn the lights on, like, oh wait, I don't know what, I kind of like, I do like the blue collar people. Okay, great. Fantastic that we know that about you. Because some people get very uncomfortable. You could want to be a high-end cosmetic dentist, but not really like dealing with affluent people. You get intimidated by them. So imagine that. It's like you're a Mercedes-Benz repairman, but you don't like dealing with affluent people who own Mercedes.
Yeah.
So it might be better. You might want to work on Ford trucks. You like those people better. It's okay.
Yeah. But I think it's important, Chris, like you're saying, is knowing what you want to target, right? And then putting out the attractant for that. Meaning, we talked about the business person is this, right? Maybe if it's the blue collar example, maybe it's just like wholesome dentistry done at a fair price. Like, maybe that's the narrative. So, but like that sets the tone for how you attract more of your bees with your honey kind of thing, metaphorically. Yeah. Let's pivot into let's go more into the consolidation pathway, because that's very top of mind to a lot of dentists right now. As a matter of fact, I had this fascinating conversation, you guys. I went to a first grade party. It was full of adults, but it was a first grade party for my kid's school. And I have 2 in first grade right now. So I met a dentist there, and I obviously won't say her name or anything, but it was just fascinating that this is kind of what the industry is thinking about consolidation. And so we were having a conversation, and she said, I practice over here, but I really like doing the dentistry, so to speak. I said, great. When I was kind of goofing around, I was like, you want to sell it to me? Kind of thing, like just because I'm an entrepreneurial dentist, and just being funny.
And you just can't help yourself, Pete.
I can't help myself sometimes. Sometimes I'm just just a jerk, I guess. Anyway, and the conversation went. She was like, "Well, sure, if you give me $7.5 million." I was like, "Okay, well that was interesting for a number."
7.49 actually.
And I was like, "Okay, well, so interesting. Well, maybe, but like, what? Tell me more about the practice." She's like, "Well, it's doing 2.2," and I was like, "So you want?" Let me get this right. You want 300% of top line revenue? She said, well, yeah, that's what the DSOs are paying now. Don't you know? And I was like, okay.
Did you get the number? Did you get that number of the DSO that's paying 3.5%?
Yeah, right. I was like, well, show me where, because that would be so. I don't know, Chris. I'm going to go on a tangent here because I actually want to do a podcast about this. Is that no one cares? No DSO cares about your top line number. Right. Yes, that is the attractant. Going back to what we were just talking about, we are their target market. Like, oh, get them in with 200% top line revenue. But ultimately, it's all about net profitability. Right. That's just how business people do stuff. So I just think it's just fascinating that we're getting all of these kind of mixed messages. Some dentists are almost getting romantic about the idea of consolidation because these quote unquote business people are just paying way more. I know I just went on a rant.
Well, they're not.
I've got him stunned in his podcast room. I think what the hell is he talking about?
No, he's checking his email. It's fine. But no, I'm kidding, Chris. But what it is that the average dentist does not know their profitability. The average dentist cannot report to you their EBITDA or their net profit. They may not even understand that.
They don't have they don't have the slightest idea what
they don't. And also they don't pay, like the average dentist is a solo practicing dentist, does not pay himself an associate wage. So he'll tell you something like my overhead is 50% or her. Yeah. Sorry. I'm using him in a general sense.
Using your pronouns.
Yeah. They don't understand because they are not paying themselves an associate wage. So they do $1 million as a total production, a collection of the practice, and they have a 50% overhead. And they're like, I have a 50% overhead. Well, if they had to hire a dentist, that dentist would not work for free. They'd have to pay them between 25 and 35%, whatever the numbers are, 38%. And then they'd really attribute their net profitability at 15% in that case. So they don't even understand these numbers. So I think it's really a great attractant, as we were saying, to just send a flyer out like that, and then do a quality of earnings and kind of add it all back. And by that point,
get them to already have spent the money on something, right? And said like, oh, damn, they're going to give me this. And then come back with a quality of earnings that says, here's what your practice is actually worth, right? So we said 7, but we meant 2.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that, again, adding to the list of the things I should have taught in dental school, a basic profit and loss understanding is beautiful. It
I think that's
boggles
the first
my
thing.
mind.
That
boggles my mind. We don't teach that. And I'll do a quick anecdote. I teach about gross profit margin, which is a relatively novel concept in dentistry. If you ask people what your margin is on a crown, like they'll tell you what their lab cost is, but they don't know impression material, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going through this concept within an audience. And I once had a dentist say to me, but you just got to get someone in the chair, going back to the busyness question. I'm like, all right, but let me put it this way. If it costs you $100 to do a thing and you're only getting $50 in revenue, you shouldn't do that thing. And he's like, nah, but you're making the $50. I'm like, no.
Oh, no,
it's costing you $100. Like you're losing $50 to do this. Like, but you're making the $50. Like, no, oh my God, no, you're not. Oh, you don't get it.
So Chris, you know what I'll tell people? I'm like, do you really like doing that thing? Like Botox is usually one that comes up because it's bought at $5 a unit and sold at $7. But there's overhead on that, so I will go through this thing. I'm like, well, do you really love doing Botox? Yeah, I really love it. I'm like, good. Do you love skiing too? Yes, I love that too. Which do you like more? Because they're both costing you money. So to see that patient that you lose $50 on, he really loves it maybe. And that's fine. We do charity work. I mean, but just call it what it is. That procedure that you do that costs you.
Well, Botox doesn't cost you money, but from a time adjusted perspective, you are right.
I happen to be friends with one of the largest Allergan account holders. He's a KOL for Allergan. He says, Botox, if I was a dentist and I had an ability to bring people in the office for a revenue producing procedure like cleanings, you guys are so lucky because you're seeing your customer over and over and over.
Right.
He's like, I have no other way. So I have to do the Botox because invariably I'll talk to them about their blepharoplasty or this or that. So it's a loss leader and it's actually worth it. But Botox as a revenue generator, he's like, I will tell you right now, no chance.
No chance.
No chance. It doesn't make you $1.
And I can tell you this from someone who's done a tremendous amount of it. No chance you make money.
Not as much as he has. I
mean, I'm saying as a dentist doing it is what I'm trying to say.
But dentists love it. I get it. I mean,
it's sexy because it's sexy.
I know. It's awesome.
Oh man, they all have these visions of doing Botox parties like around their cleanings or whatever, and just
champagne and soccer moms. It's gonna be great. They come back,
Well, but so I wanted to answer your consolidation question. I think that is kind of interesting right now. And full disclosure, Tend is a de novo only DSO by structure. We're de novo only. We're not acquiring practices. It's a business model, and we're also only in urban locations, so we're not looking to expand. If you wanted to sell me your practice in suburban wherever, we're not doing that. We're only growing by starting the practice. But anyway, that being said, I've followed this quite a bit over the past several years, as you can imagine, and I think right now it is from a financial reward standpoint, there are dentists that are able to get a multiple of EBITDA for their practice. It is more likely the case, though, if you own a couple of practices or 3 practices, if they're all on the same practice management software, like there's a boxes you can check. For the one-off sale of a practice, I don't think it's making anyone super rich, right? So if you're a dentist and you're 15 years away from retirement, right? So let's say you're 50, you want to retire at 65. If you're 50 and you sell your practice to a DSO, and I'm speaking very broadly here.
Yes,
of course.
You're not going to make retirement money from that sale. You're not, unless you have a mega powerhouse practice, in which case you probably just want to hold on to that.
What would define mega? Like, can you give just in your opinion? And again,
I always hear that many DSOs will not look at a practice unless the gross is $1 million. Now they go, to your point, into far more sophisticated calculations like EBITDA than that. But just as a benchmark, test the water kind of a thing. If you're grossing $600,000 a year, the DSO, many DSOs won't even look to touch the practice. And honestly,
it's not worth their time.
They have so many practices that they can look at. It's a gold mine of baby boomers retiring. They have so many practices that they look at. They're like, let's just get rid of these ones right now and focus on the others. For a single doc, 4 or 5 day a week practice, if you're at 1.2 and above, like, you're doing really darn well. I'd say there are plenty of DSOs that will be excited to sit down and buy you lunch. But are you going to make like an insane amount of money from that sale of that practice? I don't think so. No, you'll make nice money, but it's also going to be contingent. You're going to have to work there for a period of time. You're going to be paid in dribs and drabs over that period of time. And don't be surprised. And again, I'm speaking broadly. I'm not making disparaging remarks about any DSOs, but there are plenty of stories that anyone can go ahead and look up where what was promised in the sale of the practice isn't what became reality a few years after that sale happened, for various callbacks, certain benchmarks not being right. Yeah, callbacks.
Well, look at it. Like if you're that retiring dentist, what about the guys who are at retirement age that want to sell and they have a 5-year earnout and they get sick or they get tired or the team quits? I mean, there's other factors beyond the corporation and the doctor. There's nuances.
Well, Chris, what was interesting about the story that I gave at the party, and I was like, you know what, I'm not actually going to start comment back because I don't want to get in an argument with this person because it was just there was just so much disconnect. But I said, look, I wanted to kind of say to her is that, like, these are not charitable people. These are business people. And if someone's trying to buy you for 300% of top line revenue, that's probably equal to about 12x if I had to do an estimation in a well-run practice. They're not buying you. Therefore, there is no leverage in what they're buying, meaning there's no arbitrage. They want to buy you for 3 times of earnings and roll you up and sell for 10 to 12. The money is in the leverage and the arbitrage. It's not in, hey, we think you're a great single location practice. Like we really have to have you. That's not the game. And I think that's where, unfortunately, we are getting this narrative from, and good for them. Like, hey, we'll attract you with this, but then, oh, by the way, you're only going to get 50% of this money up front. Oh, by the way, your earnings were not as good as we thought they're going to be. Oh, by the way, you're going to have to stay on 4 years. Oh, by the way, if you don't stay this profitable, the money is going to go down by very considerable too. So there's all these contingencies that we just don't know about, but all we heard was 300% of top line revenue or 200%. And that is the thing that just makes me almost sick to my stomach because, So I don't know. I know you're not, you're de novo and you're not in that game. So you can speak very agnostically, right? Because but I'm seeing this conversation more and more and more. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we are getting
everything's
pulled.
super frothy too, though, Peter. Like everything's crazy. Like this is a snapshot in time where things are just incredibly, $90 sheets of plywood and it's all fairy tale and money is so cheap.
Well, that's come back now, Craig.
It's coming. It is. What I'd be curious, because I think that gets worse before it gets better, that those dialogues, especially as things get even frothier towards as time goes on. But what I'd be curious, Chris, is, you spend a lot of time in the industry and obviously spend a lot of time deliberating on your potential position with Tend. What is and Peter and I have been hearing this forever because we got out of school before you did. But the era of the solo practice is dwindling and dying, and consolidation is inevitability. I'd love to hear, because right now, according to the ADA, and at least the latest data that I've seen, is the majority of dentistry is still practiced as a solo, single, independently owned,
fragmented industry still.
Yeah.
Yes. Cottage industry, if you will.
Yes.
So the majority of dentists are still working. Well, there's a couple ways to slice it. Number of dentists who are practice owners and a number of practices that are owned by. Here's the cleanest data from the ADA is, I want to say it's like 60-70%, closer to 70% of practices are owned by dentists, not DSO, somewhere in that neighborhood. Check local listings, whatever. But in terms of number of dentists, about 10% of dentists working in the US work for some form of DSO.
That's it. Just 10%.
Just 10%. It's growing. That number's going up. So you look at number of practices or you look at number of dentists. What we have seen some decline in over the past few years. This is some latest breaking ADA research. The number of practice owners who are solo practice owners is declining. It's about 50%. So if you look at the number of dentists who own practices, 50% of those dentists are solo. And what's increasing then is the number of partnerships or small group practices.
Yeah, that's interesting. So
which includes myself. Like my own practice that I ran for years was a partnership. So I wouldn't be included in that statistic. I wasn't a true solo business owner. So you still have dentistry that is, so what does this all mean? I think that the future of private practice is still very strong. I think that we have, because there's a market for it, because thankfully we have patients who have a high dental IQ and they want to go to a Ruth's Chris, right? They want to go to a high end or a nicer, have a nicer oral health experience, and they don't want to go to. There are dentists patients who have certain needs that aren't being met with whatever other business models, DSO or otherwise, around them are trying to provide. So I see the future of private practice to be very strong. I think we'll continue to see the dentists who are private practice owners, whether it's solo or in a small group or a partner or whatever, I think that they will absolutely continue to need to be more entrepreneurial and think about their business models and think about these profitability and these things that we're talking about. It is harder for someone to just hang up a shingle and have unmitigated success and buy a boat and a third house. Like that is harder to do as a dentist if you're just winging it. But if you're smart about it, I think you absolutely can accomplish those things in a private practice model, and I don't care who opens up across the street from you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's a big DSO with lots of marketing dollars.
Amen.
Well, they're going to be marketing to someone, and you could be marketing to someone else, and it'll be fine.
I agree with that. One question I had for you is, obviously you got all these statistics that you're in your right off the tip of your tongue. And I'm curious, the 3 statistics that you mentioned earlier, do you have a statistic to show dentists or do you know of one where it's dentists take home earnings and how that's doing over time?
Yeah, ADA's got that. So I would urge, and you and I, we can connect offline. I can get you the link, but ADA Health Policy Institute, that's all free material. Anyone can access it. Go to ADA Health Policy Institute, look at their research briefs. They have journal articles. Those are great, but look at the research briefs. They're just nice little pieces of research. And you'll see them cover a whole range of topics. And dentist earnings is one that they look very closely at. So,
yeah, because according to what I saw it was trending downward. But
yeah.
I'm just curious how those 3 statistics you mentioned interact and affect the DSO consolidation idea. How do those 3 statistics?
Oh, they definitely influence. They definitely, dentist income is kind of a lagging one in a sense, right? Like you have to be a dentist for a few years and say, geez, I'm not making what I thought I would make. And so therefore you maybe consider as you get more seasoned joining with the DSO. I think a leading statistic, though, a leading measure and this is for dentists that are just graduating, is debt, right? There are students who think I'm in too much debt to buy or start a practice, and that's hogwash. They're being told that sometimes by recruiters for DSOs for obvious reasons. But sometimes even I hear dental school faculty who should know better saying, oh, you're in too much debt. This is an expensive school. You have to go. You don't have the choice. If you want to work at a DSO, go ahead and do that. There are DSOs. I like to think that Tend is one of them that are taking really good care of their providers and encouraging them and truly supporting them, not interfering with the doctor-patient relationship. And it's a great practice experience for those doctors, whether they want to choose to be here for a short period of time or a long period of time. But you shouldn't choose any career pathway, military, working at an FQHC, working at a DSO, whatever pathway you choose, it should not be based upon your student debt. Because
Agreed.
You can absolutely get a loan to buy or start a practice today. And that's one of the most encouraging economic factors and forces that we see today, is that Wells Fargo and PNC, the players, that they are still writing loans, 100% plus financing for dentists, as long as there's criteria. You have to show that you've practiced dentistry for a couple of years and not killed anyone, that kind of thing. But they're absolutely still writing 100% plus financing to buy or start practices. That is the engine that keeps private practice alive and well.
Right. I also think the narrative, obviously there's DSOs pumping their narrative, but I do believe that the narrative that your practice is going to be a retirement vehicle and it's going to pave your way for retirement, that's also false. So imagine a guy or gal who works for a DSO and does well and saves well and buys income producing property or diversifies in the stock market. They have a diversified asset portfolio and they've deleveraged their salary and the retirement strategy. So one reason why people get really, really wealthy is they have consolidation. One reason why people lose everything, they have consolidation. So if you're working at a DSO or in a dental practice and you're a well-paid associate and you're spending less, or if you're saving more than you spend and you're diversifying yourself, you may wind up finding yourself in a better position than that majority solo owner doctor that they think.
Correct.
Yeah. So
that's absolutely correct.
And I think there's shame in that. You'll hear like, oh, I'm just an associate, I don't own, and there's shame, and there shouldn't be. No. Because it's like, if you can make a good living and be smart with your money, you can wind up being very far better off than borrowing from, the big banks and opening up your own practice.
That's absolutely correct. And I'm glad you say that, and I think that we came up around the time that DSOs were something you never heard of to now, and I talk to dental students all the time. They're at major dental events and dental student events recruiting. So we were around this time of never heard of it to, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. Are they taking over kind of fear? And I think some of the more established and seasoned dentists do have this downward looking opinion on DSOs. It's gotten better. It's gotten better. But I still think we have a long way to go. And I think it's up to people in our generation to continue that positivity. So for the new dentists that are working, or the seasoned dentists that are working DSO, it's like, okay, that's fine. Like it
Yep.
shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
I agree. It's gotten way better. Even in the past couple of years, I've seen there's a pivot because actually, to benefit of you guys, like people like yourself coming on that are doing high quality kind of concepts versus just aggregation roll-ups where it used to be just anything and it's a race to the bottom and profit first over people kind of thing. And now that's changing. Now you're going into, DSOs going back to what you're saying, their target market, their experience, who they want to find and really being, and being dentist led. A lot of them are now dentist led, like yours. So
we should look down upon unethical treatment of patients, quotas and all these other kinds of distasteful things that we think interfere with the doctor-patient relationship, unethical treatment of doctors and providers. We should look down upon those things, but they can just as easily happen in private practice as they can.
Of course.
Sure.
Sometimes more. You work for some like duct tape DSO with like 2 locations. They can get away with a lot more than a regional DSO with 50, 80, multiple locations. They run their practices oftentimes better than some of these guys that are tucked away in strip malls too.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's important. I think as time goes on, there'll be more customized DSOs that have go-to-market strategies that suit the unique desires of individual dentists. And my hope is that there's no shame, that people can have great careers. I mean, listen, when's the last time you heard a doctor saying like a medical professional, well, I'm just an associate at the Cleveland Clinic. I don't own the Cleveland Clinic. Like you just wait you work at the Cleveland Clinic. Like point. Every no medical doctor says, well, I'm just work at the hospital. I don't own it. Like, dude, you work at freaking, so it's interesting. There's so much shame in dentistry that doesn't need to be there. So I'm hoping that if someone's listening today and they hear that they can release a little bit of that. It's great to have a job and an investment strategy that are decoupled from each other. For us business owners, if a hurricane or a flood rolls through or a fire rolls through your business, it's different than just having your wages being affected, but your retirement strategy as well. It's not always a fun feeling.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, cool.
Chris, I know you're busy, but thank you for your time, man. I've been
great.
I'm glad to really connect you after like I said, I've heard about you my entire career and, and I know you got a lot going on, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to just us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. It's been my pleasure. Hopefully we'll, now that the world is opening up again, we'll bump into each other at a meeting or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. And good luck with Tend. I mean, from an outsider looking in, I'm really fascinated about what you guys are doing. It definitely feels very unique and different. So I think Tend is lucky to have a guy like you. And I know under your stewardship, it's going to go even further. So thanks, I'm excited to be interacting with what you're up to and what Tend's doing in the future. I'm excited for that.
Cheers. Thanks, man.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Take care.